Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens. This is Jake along with Scott, and we are back in the office, aka the basement, and we've got our good friend Zach Johnston that is joining us today. So in this week's episode, we're going to be talking Zach's transition into the bourbon world and whiskey world. That's kind of weird. And what's going on with Blackwood Distilling and everything that's going on in life as well. So sit back and buckle in and listen to this latest episode featuring Zach Johnston and Blackwood Distilling. So Zach, how are you, sir?
Doing well. Very happy to be back in the presence of you two gentlemen.
I know it's been a while. I think the last time we were supposed to see you was a dinner that you just happened to not make.
Hey, which one was that again?
In Shelbyville.
Oh, yeah.
No distilleries will be named, but we will just say that we were supposed to see you in Shelbyville and you canceled. But it's okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We missed you. But a lot's happened since then. You have transitioned from I'm going to make this claim, like most popular or well-known whiskey writer with all of the stuff you've done at Up Rocks, because they have done a great job helping promote, all the stuff you've done, to moving into the bourbon and whiskey world in a completely different way. So what's life been like with the transition?
It's been tumultuous. I had a very good last month with Up Rocks in March. We threw an amazing South by Southwest event with Rabbit Hole and Farmer's Gin, and we had a whole bunch of big hip hop stars there, like Just Blaze and Talib Kweli and Redman and Jazzy Jeff. And then I sort of had my kind of victory lap at Up Rocks, where I got to write my 100 favorite whiskeys of all time list and train my replacement, the amazing Frank Dubins III, who you guys might know as Burb Your Enthusiasm in the whiskey world. And then I started my new gig at Blackwood Distilling, which they brought me on because they're expanding the brand towards a bigger event that's coming on the very near future horizons. And they wanted to expand the brand internationally and nationally, because we've been Kentucky based for the last 4 years. And so we were expanding into Texas and Florida, Georgia, and Colorado this year already. Looking at Wyoming, Montana, possibly a few other states, and then expanding internationally. We want to have an international footprint. And so since I lived abroad basically for 20 years, 2003 to 2022, with 14 years in Berlin and various other places, sort of brought on to bring that expertise. And so the first 2-3 weeks are almost behind me, and it's been a fun, just complete shift in work, but a good one, because it's I'm using muscles that I've created but haven't had time to flex in a while.
Joining the corporate world.
Yeah. In the business side of things, from the media side.
Yeah, well, you said one of your highlights is that you have an expense account. So, I never have considered that to be a highlight of my career, but I've had one of those, and I hate keeping receipts. It's like the worst.
Submit affidavit, lost receipt.
Yeah. Well,
here's a picture of the credit card.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, given the state of media in 2024, I don't think there's a lot of expense accounts being handed out to people these days.
No, it has taken a very interesting turn, because you basically have media on site everywhere with social media, and whether you're an influencer or you're a podcaster or you are a YouTuber or a whatever, I'm sure there's something new that I don't know about. A TikToker?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They're out there.
An OnlyFanser? I don't know.
Yeah, they're out there too.
Is that where we're going?
I almost said that, but I didn't. A Patreoner, because we are that as well. I think it's very interesting. You can just get people on site. So, instead of having that $3,000 flight to go cover whatever, you can just say, hey, who in the Rolodex gives a shit about whatever? And there they are. And if they're halfway decent at writing content or making something compelling, Bob's your uncle. So interesting enough, Scott was saying this beforehand. We tried like hell to figure out how to make this happen while you were at Up Rocks, and we never made it happen. So before we get into the new gig completely, because the whiskey is in front of us, we will talk about it, and we will not let the people of Blackwood Distilling down on this podcast. I promise you. But, we don't always have our friends on the podcast as well. So, for people who don't know, it's really hard to talk about whiskey and to write blind, and you did a lot of blind whiskey. tasting. So can you walk people through just what it's like to taste hundreds, if not thousands of whiskeys in a year from brands, not just in America, but around the world?
Right. I mean, it was daunting because it's one of those things where on the surface it sounds like a dream job. And then you actually have to deal with the reality of that. Right. And so, I would sometimes post, I would get, 35, 100 ml samples in days, or I'd get, I'd come home and there would be literally 20 boxes waiting by my door. And that, again, it's like, oh, you're complaining about, the money falling on you, or you're complaining about
first world problems.
Yeah, first world. It's like, yeah, but then you have to deal with those boxes, and you have a family, and you have a certain amount of space, and then it's like, I have to, break down all the boxes and get all the stuff away. And then you have to get to actually tasting this stuff and organizing it and cataloging it and making sure you know what's what. And, so the whole process of the actual physicality of it is a full-time job almost in and of itself. A lot of people doing what I do at higher levels, they have teams, of people who can organize and catalog and, make sure stuff is in the right spot. I was doing this on my own, obviously. And you guys do this on your own, you know how it is. And it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so when you actually have to deliver other stuff for your job, it's sort of, you have to learn to balance working from home and, getting all your stuff organized. Plus, when I was brought on to Uprocks back in 2016, I was brought on because I had already been traveling the world for 20 years. I'd been deep in food culture, deep in whiskey culture, bar culture. I'd already been going to BCB in Berlin for years before I ever started Uprocks. I'd worked at the highest end bars in Berlin, Victoria Bar and Rum Trader. I'd built a huge palate for food and drink. I worked at, wine bars, and I had built knowledge of both bourbon, Irish whiskey, Scotch whiskey, Italian, French wines, et cetera, German wines. And I'd worked in kitchens and making food all over the world. And so part of the reason Uprocks brought me on, Steve Bermucci, who gave me a job, and sort of I found kindred spirit in, is because I had that background, right? I didn't just come on and be like, hey, I want to write about whiskey, and I've had Jack Daniels. It's like,
you and everybody else.
Yeah, right.
And I mix it with Coke.
Yeah, I was extremely lucky when I was living in LA in 07, 08. My best friend there, wonderful man, Scotland Stevenson, he was managing the Vendome in Toluca Lake, and he would run the whiskey and wine tastings, or the whiskey tastings, and I think the wine tastings, but the whiskey tastings every week. And so he'd open bottles, and then he'd bring them home, and we'd hang out on the weekends and play cribbage and play guitar and hang out and drink those bottles. And this was in 07, 08, and those bottles were like Pappy 20 or Blanton Singleton or Black Maple Hill or A.H. Hirsch. And because they were elite high-end bottles then, but they were 69, 89, maybe $99. And so that was sort of him then giving me a birth through that world of, hey, this is what people actually care about in Kentucky that they're making, and like walking me through what was actually special about those. And so from there, I was able to continue building on that as I worked in the high-end bar scene. So coming into media, I was coming in with all that behind me already, because I'm not that young. I'm in my mid-40s, so I've lived a little bit of life, I guess you could say. And then, so through Uprocks, because Steve Bermucci was so open in his approach to being the managing editor there, him and I sort of built together and slowly built the drink section together. And it was his idea to do the blind taste test, because we were looking at the way, this is in 2017, 2018 maybe, we were looking at the way that whiskey was covered back then, spirits in general. And it was very boilerplate. I'm not going to get into who, what, doing what, where, but it was very much like, you see a lot of press release, just copy and paste. You see a lot of copy and paste of tasting notes, and very rarely did you ever see links to the actually buy the bottles, which baffled me. And so we were like, listen, let's set ourselves some rules here that will set us apart. Let's never review anything we haven't tasted, period. It's always linked to buy the bottle so that people can see that it's real, even if it's a secondary exclusive, like something LTO, whatever, that you can get it in the real world if you want to pay that extra price or not. without getting into that murkiness. And let's never copy and paste a press release. So always write fresh. And then that's how we sort of born into the blind tasting process, which allowed me to also be honest, where I could be like, "Hey, this isn't that great. I would, suggest this instead." So, if something, if there's a new release and it's, a younger whiskey and it's like, yeah, it's kind of green. If you don't like this, try this version or this expression they have out. And I could, easily and understandably say I didn't really dig something without pissing off the PR people or the brand people or anything like that, because it was blind. I didn't know what it was. And then we just kind of built on that. And then, of course, 2020 helped in that people were at home drinking and searching and Googling and buying. And so, again, Steve had the right mind to be like, okay, let's just focus on whiskey with me. Because before that, I was still doing food and a bit of travel and beer and, covered champagne and stuff like that and rum and gin and blah, blah, blah. And so he's like, let's just do whiskey and just go from there. And then I started doing the judging and everything from there on. And then we grew into this, behemoth where, I was tens upon tens upon tens of millions of views and things like that were
for sure
becoming the norm. And it just kept growing and growing. Even, we're 4 years out from the pandemic now, and people, my views never dipped. They just grew year by year. So, it was very much a great learning experience, because through that, I got to meet you guys. We got to go on amazing trips together.
Yeah.
Shout out to Wyoming Whiskey.
Amen.
And, but I also learned
not much there though.
Right. But I also got to learn, I got to visit probably 100 distilleries and, taste,
hundreds of 20s and 30s of countries.
Yeah. And at least 10,000 whiskeys probably. So the education I got through that was really sort of it's like a fucking PhD. I don't know what else to compare it to.
I was going to say, good thing you narrowed it to whiskey, because otherwise you wouldn't have had any room.
Right. And luckily I specifically was like, I'm not going to, because Steve and I did talk about, do you just want to do bourbon or American? It's like, nah, I'd go and kind of crazy if I just did one.
Yeah.
Like just bourbon or just American. I've mentioned this when I was writing for Up Rocks Lockley. I drink mostly Japanese whiskeys, Scotch, rye, and then bourbon, and then, other things falling under there. So I'm a big Japanese whiskey guy and Scotch whiskey guy first and foremost. So I wanted to be able to still cover those. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a good dynamic there as well, because if you cover more, you don't get burnt out as quickly, you don't get as bored as quickly. And there's so much fun stuff going on all over the world in whiskey that it's just sort of, it made sense to cover it all.
Yeah. Well, I think we can agree with you on that. We started as a strictly bourbon podcast, and slowly, thanks to Scott, we found American single malt. And then American single malt led to us to be like, well, let's try this non-peated Scotch,
right.
And let's try this Irish whiskey, and let's try, because I'm looking at the Cavalon bottle, or however you say it, the Cavalon Taiwanese, and then Japanese, and it just kind of all hodgepodged around. And now some of my favorite whiskeys aren't American whiskeys. Now, I'm Kentuckian. Bourbon's always going to be number one.
Yeah. We're always going to come back home.
But that Cavalon, man, they make some good whiskey.
Well, yeah. And that, what was also cool is then to see the tropics that Jefferson's did. So because I've seen what whiskey tastes like coming out of Taiwan, now I'm like, oh shit, that's how the parallels to Trey is hey, if I put this in a container and I drop it off in Taiwan, it's going to be hot as shit. And that's going to bring out different flavors. No, that's really fun to compare. And people are like, oh, Trey's full of shit because, these things. An open air container floating around the sea is going to do something different than if it sits in a rick house in Kentucky.
Period. Yeah.
End of story. Yeah. You can call it a gimmick all you want. It's pretty innovative if you ask me. But it is what it is. But
it's innovative and old school at the same time. Not to get too in the weeds, but it's sort of the reason this stuff has color in it is because they put it into wood to ship it around the country and the world.
Yeah.
So shipping whiskey around, it's got that perfect balance of old school and innovative, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
That's so true. And me and Scott, I don't know. I'm not going to speak for you. I would read your articles because we would get a bottle and be like, this is what I think. What does Zach think?
Yeah. Taste it and then go find the article that you posted, and I'm like, let's scroll to the tasting notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it was kind of cool because you would blind 10, 12 whiskeys at a time. I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, I did a blind with like 8 one time, and I was like, my palate's gone.
Yeah. 6 is like pushing it for me.
Yeah. Like that's what I want to talk about a little bit, because you talked about the blinds extensively, but like, was there ever a point in time where, and you've done competitions, but like palate fatigue has to have been a thing for you?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's definitely 100% real. I think, one thing that working in the bar industry helped me deal with was knowing that it exists, knowing how to sort of like pace yourself and let your palate sort of mellow. What's interesting is I think there's 2 aspects to it, especially if you're doing like 12, like let's say you have a panel of 12 pours, and especially if it's in the last couple of years. And we all know this, like a lot of this stuff is coming from very, very similar sources. And I don't necessarily mean the same exact place, but basically the same mash bill or a very close one, basically the same age, within maybe 100 miles of where we're sitting. And so there's a lot of continuity in the profile from one to another, to another, to another, where you get bored mentally and you get palate fatigue physically until that one pour that just pops because it's exemplary.
Yeah.
And even if you're bored and have palate fatigue, it's actually going to reactivate your palate, and it's going to reactivate your mind. You're going to be like, oh shit, where's this been? Where's this from? What's this? Like, what's going on here? That said, I usually do like 3 pours, take a pretty solid break. I'll either like rinse with soda water or, have a bite of celery or
do
something simple, like, or just, have a sip of, maybe I try not to drink the water, because like if you drink a lot of bubbly water, you're just going to get bloated if you're doing like, pours all day.
Yeah.
But bubbly water really does a good job of cleansing your palate, especially if you swash it around like a mouthwash and spit it out. And then just take a couple minutes, like check your phone, like listen. Like I would always have music playing when I was tasting. So like length of a 3-minute song, usually long enough, and then do 3 more pours.
He's like Metallica to his own. He's like Blackened to his blind tasting.
Yeah, you gotta have a good reset.
Yeah.
And it's the sort of thing.
Step away. I mean, even just
Scott just pours JTS Brown.
If my palate gets worn out with just
And it's a muscle.
That's my bubbly water.
That's bubbly water, JTS Brown.
And it's a muscle. You just got to train it, right?
Yeah.
You got to keep up and sort of, I just got back from San Francisco World Spirits Competition, and we did close to 350 in 3 days. And it was the sort of thing where, they're very smartly regimented there, where it's sort of like 8 to 10 pours per panel. You get plenty of time in between panels, and, no one is rushed. They have people standing by. So if you do feel like you have to tap out, you can tap out and somebody will come sit in for you. And so it's very well regulated in that because they want to, keep that very high sort of standard. And, you get through it. I mean, I've been doing it for years now, 3rd or 4th year. And so I'm used to it, but it's sort of the thing where you got to realize like what your limits are and know your limits and know, when you do have to tap out, tap out.
Have they taught you any karate moves or taekwondo moves? Because, I mean, you do wear those cool white robes, like you got a gi on.
Karate shop the palate out.
Yeah. Right for the karate.
Yeah.
A bunch of scientists walking around.
Oh, yeah.
What's funny, though, is like after you do that and you'll have like 100 pours, like I think we had like 106 pours one day. You'll do that. And I swear to God, the first thing you want to do is go out and get like a crisp beer or a crisp wine or something that's like a bit of a flavor bomb.
Yeah.
Because you need anything else to sort of like reset. And you're just like,
I don't need anything but no caramel and vanilla, please.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No whiskey. Get that shit away from me. But it would be like, because San Francisco get like a nice pour of Pliny the Elder, West Coast IPA, and just like, oh, luxuriate.
Yeah.
And, the crispness of it. And then you're all good again.
I mean, it's all about coming back to a reset. And so, one of the things you said is you said your farewell, you did your top 100 whiskeys, right? And we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about this, because I'm sure we have our Mount Rushmore. You have your Mount Rushmore of whiskeys. For the listeners who haven't gotten a chance to go and look at that, what was let's go with your top 5. Ben, I'm going to go to top 5 and your one surprise that made it, kind of high up on the list.
Okay. I have to look up just for a refresher here.
He doesn't even remember his top 100 whiskeys. Scott, what's your number one whiskey you've ever drank? JTS Brown?
Well, no, I know my number one.
Oh.
Yeah.
The top whiskey I've ever tried?
Yeah.
Wild Turkey Generations, partly because it's damn good whiskey, but also because...
And we tried it together, guys.
We all drank it together. And I think that's probably one of my top.
I mean, Jimmy's Cocktail was also pretty good. Just a cold bottle of rare breed rye, rare breed bourbon. Like that was
straight out of the freezer.
Straight out of the freezer. I thought that was the funniest thing. No, I mean, mine, it's wild, but like the Eagle Rare 17 from 2023 was some of the best whiskey I've ever drank in my life. Like it was so damn good.
That was a good one. That's just it. Like, looking back at my list, getting a refresher here, like this is another thing, like we get to try so much crazy shit.
Yeah.
That you can't answer this question without sounding like the biggest pretentious prick on the planet. Because
we all are.
Yeah. Because it's like, okay, well, yeah, my favorite pour of bourbon is a 1964 Old Fitz, right? Which
you can't
exactly.
Yeah.
Your reaction is exactly
it's like,
right.
let me go grab my bottle.
Yeah. And, if you look at my Instagram deep enough, you'll find a bottle of me literally killing it by chugging one, So it's like, but am I supposed to apologize just because I have access to that stuff?
No.
Of course not. Yeah, right. Like so,
if you have access to it, I mean that is your whiskey sphere, right?
Yeah.
And you should be unapologetic about that.
Yeah, and it's sort of the same thing with my actual probably favorite pour is a Talisker 30. Talisker 25, Talisker 18, all great too. I'm not going to turn them down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I probably like the Talisker 30 a little bit more because it's 30 instead of 15 or whatever. Like that stupid thing in your head where it's like, oh, I was 30 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Redbreast 27, Cavalon Soloist. There's so many, there's like a list of Habikis. Where do you even want to begin with the 21-year-olds or the special releases? Yoichi's doing great stuff with their peated malts. The 10-year-old, like these subtle, simple things that aren't that expensive, aren't that rare per se.
Yeah,
but they're not everywhere. But they're so subtle and delicious, and it's this funny thing where it's like when I look at bourbon, and one of the things. There's a segue brought to you by Segway. One of the things that attracted me to Blackwood, even when I was still on the media side, was that this whiskey felt like that classic old bourbon from the 70s a little bit. Like there's a little bit of that nostalgia in there in the way they've built it. And so it kind of fits in my wheelhouse of what I like about bourbon and rye, American bourbon and rye.
Yeah.
And that sort of classic. When you taste, even if you're looking at, the old National, old Grandad 114 from back in the, 70s, that they were doing at Taylor, that stuff has such a distinctness to it.
Yeah.
That you then understand when you sip that, you're like, oh, that's why everyone was so pissed off when they changed this.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's night and day, right?
For sure.
And so kind of being able to enjoy those sorts of pours is a huge privilege. Don't get me wrong. I'm not ever going to pretend it's not, but also it's a necessary education when you're in this world where you need to know where this, especially in American whiskey, where the bourbon world and rye world came from. And for me, when you taste that Old Fitz from 1964, there was this light bulb where it's like, oh, this is what everyone's been chasing for the last 30 years. They're trying to get back here. No one's quite done it yet, but God, they're trying.
Yeah.
And
so, well, unfortunately, Bullet has the still that was used to create that whiskey in pieces at their new distillery.
Right. Yeah. So it's lost in time, but that's good though. I like that. It's sort of like
you can't make it again.
It's like, and you know what? Nobody can remake Kubrick's The Shining either.
Yeah.
It's a piece of amber.
Yeah.
And that's great. And luckily, we're lucky enough we can watch that movie. And we're also lucky enough we can still drink that whiskey for a little while longer. Yeah. And when it's gone, it's gone. And, that'll be that. Yeah. What I wonder is what's going to be the 1964 Old Fitz or the H here 19 or whatever, or, the Black Maple Hill for the next generation from right now.
I think about that all the time.
I see it on my shelf.
like just reading like Goldfarb's book, like Dusty Booze. I'm like, what's the next freaking Dusty bottle?
Right.
Like, what's it going to be from?
Well, you got to think about
times?
It's got to be 30 years from now. And the answer is Master's Keep 17 bottle and bond. That's the answer.
You think the Master's Keeps will be those?
No, just the Master's Keep bottle and bond.
The bottle of the
Because
that is a magnificent pour.
It's like it gives you a little bit of yesteryear, but it gives you a little bit of new old, like new school, like at the same time, because it's got that sassafras and like cola and like deep dusty kind of funk to it, but it also has like full flavor and cleanliness, right? Because you're getting that clean still, but Jimmy and Eddie made it.
Yeah.
Right. So like that's one of those things. Anything that can give you that. Some of the older old fits can give you that, like the 15, the 17. I think they have a 18, 19? 19.
There's a 19, yeah.
Yeah. And then the Heaven Hill collection, like just the traditional bourbons, or, it could be for you. Your Dusty pour could be Heaven Hill 20-year-old corn whiskey. Mellow corn, 20 years old.
When I find it, it'll be on my bar.
Hey, I mean,
that's a good pour.
That's like when I find a Jameson 21, it's not because I think it's going to be the best whiskey I've ever had in my life. It's because when my son turns 21, I want to have that damn bottle of Jameson 21 sitting on the bar because his name's Jameson. Damn it.
But see, I feel like all the producers now are trying to make that bottle. I think like 30 years ago, they weren't really trying to make those bottles. It just happened.
Yeah. That's what you have to let happen, right? You gotta just like let it flow and find that perfect balance between, because look, we're never going to go back. We're never going to have those barrels again because those trees were alive 100 years ago, and never going to have that water again because it's different. Never going to have that climate again. We're never going to have that grain again.
Yeah.
We're never going to have that yeast again. Yeah. So it's sort of like, as opposed to like looking back too much, it's sort of like, well, what do we have now?
Yeah.
And how can we maximize that into this perfect sort of combination and create something that, generations want to pass on again?
Yeah. So good segue. We'll move into, I told you Blackwood, we wouldn't forget about you. So we'll take that and we'll, cause you kind of mentioned this earlier about going old school about how they created the brand and, where we got here today. So for those who don't know, because to be honest, I didn't know shit about it until you took a job there. And then I did some research. So for the listeners who don't know, tell them a little bit about the story of how the whiskey, kind of came to be and who's behind making it.
Yeah. So, and that's very fair to say because it was a very small niche LTO brand for the last 3 to 4 years, Kentucky only. It was started by 3 people came together. Guinness McFadden, who owned Blackwood Farms. He won the Kentucky Derby in 2019 with Country House, 65-1 odds.
It's called a payday for everyone who doesn't know outside of Kentucky.
Yeah.
Payday.
Yeah. And then the next year, he's been a bourbon guy. He came from the wine scene out in California, been Kentuckian for years now. He hooked up with Justin Thomas and Justin Sloan at House of Bourbon, Lexington and Louisville. I'm sure your listeners have heard of that.
There's just big billboards going down 64 and 65. If you've missed them, open your eyes, get off your phone.
Turn here.
Turn here, yeah. And so, Justin Thomas, it was Guinness and him had this idea sort of, and then Justin Sloan came on to, kind of help bring it to life. Because, JT and Sloan have been doing this stuff for over a decade now, 12 years. They've been in this industry, tasting whiskeys, working in both vintage bourbon, but also in, barrel picks and everything else in the bourbon industry because they have both available in their shops. And, Guinness, again, coming from the wine world out in California, wanted to get into bourbon as well. So they started this very niche elite brand with LTOs only of extremely small batch, toasted barrel finished bourbon and rye. And so over the last 3 years, there have been 3 batches of the bourbon, 2 batches of the rye. Again, we're talking very small batch. So the batch 2 of the rye is only 600 bottles. Batch 3 of the bourbon is only 1,500 bottles. And so what they're doing with the bourbon, they would bring in some Kentucky bourbon that has already been aged for 6-7 years. They would transfer that into a fresh toasted Kelvin cooperage barrel, let that rest until it was just right, a few months, and then bottle that and batch those barrels into a very small batch release. That was for House of Bourbon, which generally where it was sold, and then Bourbon Outfitters online, and then we've expanded into several on-premise locations around Kentucky. Over those years, sort of built up an audience. We do barrel picks with Railbird Music Festival, things like that, and it's came to a time where Guinness and JT and Sloan decided it was time to start expanding, because we have a big expansion coming on the horizon in 2026 that I can't
just
talk
pay
about
attention
too much
to Lexington News.
Yeah, pay attention to Lexington News and you'll see what we're talking about. But basically, we want to expand the footprint of the brand, maybe start a few other brands around Blackwood Distilling. And so Guinness called me up because we had been, doing stuff together through me on the media side. I'd covered them pretty extensively for a couple years. And yeah, it sort of came about just organically. Like, I wasn't really even looking for a new job per se. And, it was the sort of thing where, I have 20 years experience working internationally, Asia and Europe, in spirits. I've obviously have 8 years in media. I wasn't, and also kind of, I guess, crucially, I wasn't a journalist in media. I was straight up a writer, critic, judge. Like, I was never a journalist like Aaron Goldfarb or, maybe Kimbrell or them. They're real journalists. I'm not. So like my time in media was always business focused, SEO focused. Like, I was very much there, to do a job that help keep the lights on at Uprock, sort of thing. So, I worked very heavily on the social media side and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so like me coming on is about expanding the brand, a bigger U.S. footprint. We're we're moving into Texas, Florida, Georgia, and Colorado already this year. Like imminent, very, very soon. In fact, Paul Novelli from Bourbon with Friends podcast and I were both hired on the same time. He's down in Florida right now, receiving some cases and doing tastings. So yeah, we're basically just getting this brand in a bigger footprint. We're going to have some new expressions coming out that are not LTOs, that are going to be more widely available at a better price point. Scott very judiciously was asking me price points for LTOs. We were looking at bottles that are $149, $179, $229, depending on the batch, depending on the single barrel, etc.
Yeah.
This has been an elite whiskey for the last 3 years, and it's a luxury product, and nobody ever shied away from that. Like, it was never meant to be anything but that, right?
Yeah. It wasn't for a daily consumption.
No, it was a celebration whiskey, right? And that was sort of the idea, because the whole thing was branded around Blackwood Farms, Country House. I mean, it's one of those whiskeys, Kentucky whiskeys, that has a horse on it, but actually has a meaning behind it. It's not like some fake made up heritage. It's like, no, this is the horse that actually won the Kentucky Derby. It's founded by the guy who actually had the farm, and it's the horse. It's a real story, right? And it's a real thing, and it's the real people behind it. So it's not just a horse for the sake of there being a horse because it's from Kentucky.
Yeah.
And so the idea being, don't really compromise on the juice and do something that's special with the toast barrel finish. It's not unique. I mean, other brands do that very well. Michter's being the prime example of doing it well, but never play into like trends or stuff, anything like that. Like, just keep it very between the lines, clear, concise, good whiskey that people can enjoy in a celebratory setting, right?
Make the juice worth the squeeze, for lack of better terms.
Yes.
So let's talk about said whiskey. I have devoured mine, and I would like to say, first and foremost, it is good.
You need to top off there?
No, it is good. And I think a lot of times we get so caught up in like these really minute tasting notes, and I could give you a swath of them.
Yeah.
I'll just tell you this. It's worth the price point. There's not a lot of bourbons out there that probably meet the flavor profile that's available with the overall cost. I also know, and I will sing this till the cows come home, when you have sourced whiskey and then you put it in a fresh barrel, which they did, that gets very expensive in a heartbeat. There's a lot of taxes. There's a lot of stuff that's got to get paid. So for everyone being moaning about bourbon prices, if it's sourced, just know they got to pay taxes twice, and they ain't going to pay them all themselves. So it is a really good bourbon. It is a celebratory bourbon. It's got a lot of great flavors. I will turn it to our whiskey critic, Scott, and let you unpack it a little bit.
I mean, to me, it's classic Kentucky bourbon. It almost has like the sweet tobacco note that I really like. Like I always like, oh, there it is. Like if I find that in a bourbon, I'm just like, I'm drawn to it.
You're home.
Yeah, and it's got the sweetness that I love. It has ample amount of barrel character, and it's probably the toasted versus a 20-year-old bourbon, which I don't drink a lot of 20-year-old bourbons. But it's got a nice woodiness to it. It's almost like an old wood. Like
right.
That's what I keep going back to the glass, just keep smelling it. I'm like, okay, there's like a little bit of like a charred wood to it, but then it's got like a little bit of like fresh wood too. Like it's kind of like balanced. I don't know.
Yeah.
I kind of liken it to, I totally know what you mean, the cherry tobacco, but then, yeah, it's almost like a barrel house funk a little bit, where like when you walk in the barrel house and there's like fresh barrels over there, but like older barrels here and the old sort of wood, and it's sort of like all mixing together into one sort of vibe. And what I like about this as a toasted barrel finish product is it doesn't overdo the wood to the point where it's like pitchy firewood, or sort of like, because sometimes they can get a little bitter.
Yeah, like smoke and fire.
Yeah, and this doesn't go that far. This really keeps it pulled back towards that, like, to me, what was quintessential Kentucky bourbon. Like, it's dark stewed fruits, sweet caramel, lush vanilla, little leatheriness, that little, like you said, the like woodiness in there. That's kind of like spice barks, but also kind of like you're in a barrel house, and, it's sort of got dynamicism to it.
Yeah. That's the one thing I liked about it, was there was not a lot of barrel astringency from it that can happen in toasted barrels. And
especially French oak.
Yeah.
That's why I don't like French oak.
But I love French oak barrels. And there wasn't a lot of like the tannin, right? That bitterness was not there. So I like that. There was you said stewed fruits. I was thinking kind of like that compote, or like a jam, like almost strawberry, or like a cherry, like cobbler type thing kind of going on. Cause as you mix like that vanilla and like breadiness that kind of comes with it, you can almost get a dessert feel out of it. And it's a super viscous whiskey. That's the one thing I just kept swirling around. I kept losing whiskey because I kept like watching it go around. I'm like, oh, there's less whiskey in the bottom. There's less whiskey in the bottom. Cause it was sticking to the glass. So it coats your mouth. It's a bunch of flavor. This would be one of the ones, if you were writing a review, it's a flavor bomb.
And you're right about the mouthfeel. The mouthfeel, I feel like, really adds to the experience, because I think we're at about 58% on this one, on the bourbon, and it doesn't read at all warm on the palate. Like it's a little warm on the back end. You get that little bit of Kentucky hug, but overall that nice viscosity really helps mellow the whole experience.
You said it's 116?
I believe so. Yeah,
not a shot in hell.
Yeah, I don't really get much proofiness at all, which is
no. I would have said this was in the 100.
Oh no, it's far above. Yeah.
Well, good job on blending it, because it's.
Sometimes you just zap your palate with
right.
Proof,
this doesn't do that at all. Yeah,
very rounded,
especially on the nose. Like there's no ethanol or anything. Like it really, like it gives you that full bouquet on the nose.
Yeah, I like those sweeter, like more well-rounded.
And we all know how it works as well. We're talking about a fresh oak barrel here that's toasted, so those sugars are going to be super available when that whiskey goes in. So you're getting a little that amplification for sure.
Well, and you're getting premium barrels too, right? With Kelvin barrels, because
Kelvin, so.
And I'm not saying that ISC is not premium barrels.
Oh, of course not.
But but like Kelvin, this is what they do. Like this is their bread and butter. Boutique barrels to enhance flavors.
Wood fire.
Made the old school way.
Yeah. Yes.
And That's not knocking anyone doing a new school way. It's just saying they're bringing barrel tradition of hundreds of years here to America and doing it in the most weird place in all of Louisville, Kentucky.
Yeah, if I'm on the fence about it because I wish people could see like how authentically like industrial it is, but also like small time, like just visceral. But also I don't ever want it to change. So it's like, I don't want them to have to change anything to make it safe for people to see it because it's not safe for people to go in there. It is
Jake's got a testament to that.
Yeah.
Jake will tell you, yes, I just spoke in third person. Don't ever pick up a fresh barrel. Just don't do it.
Oh God.
I have done it. Don't do it.
Sharp edges.
Sharp edges.
Yeah.
And it's not the barrel that'll get you. It's the barrel rings that you got to worry about.
Yeah.
They are not, they're not ironed. Like, you know, the wood staves, they're pretty smooth. Iron rings, not so much.
A little jagged.
But
it is an amazing place. Like it's one of those things where it's almost unbelievable that it exists in a world with any regulations. And like, I'm not saying anything about any of that stuff, but like,
how does a place like this exist?
Right.
And not have OSHA in here every 3 minutes.
Right. Yeah. And it's a small crew. I think it's 60, 65 people. And yeah, and they're just putting out amazing barrels and again, heritage. I mean, you know, coming from Scotland, coming to Kentucky, bringing those worlds together to make barrels. It's fantastic. And that's another thing that for me makes something like Blackwood, you know, an elite product, right? Is that toast to finish in a Kelvin barrel specifically. It's not, you know, we didn't just go grab a big mass produced barrel to finish this in because then what's the fucking point?
Yeah. It's that additional craftsmanship.
Well, and we were talking about brands that this kind of reminds us of, like 15 Stars is one, but the more we keep talking about Kelvin, the one that comes to mind and the easy parallel is Foregate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Halo brand effect, super rare, rich whiskey. But they're using Kelvin barrels to do all their finishing, which is really cool. And hey, they've done a great job. They've put out a crap ton of releases and people keep buying it. And a lot of it has to do with what the team has done around using Kelvin barrel.
And sort of like where we then shift from that dynamic is, and I don't know what Foregate's doing, so don't take this as any sort of illusion, but we're like looking more at like the Michter's model, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, they put out their LTOs for the first few years, you know, the 25 and the 20 and the 10s, and then they built that 4-bottle line for the masses, the small batch bourbon, the single barrel rye, the on blended American, and the sour mash, right? Yeah. All under $50. You can get them everywhere, sort of thing, or mostly everywhere, and then build that out internationally. So it's the sort of thing that's what we're looking to do now, and why I was brought on with Paul is that, you know, we're looking to be like, okay, where do we fit in that dynamic, especially internationally, because, you know, without getting it too deep into the economics of American whiskey, if you're not looking international as a brand, you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, I mean, everybody keeps talking. It's untapped.
Yeah,
right.
Well, it depends where you go, right?
Yeah,
India untapped. You know what I mean? China untapped. Japan, Germany, UK, Australia.
Tapped a little bit.
Tapped, but like there's no water pressure, if you know what I mean.
It's there.
Yeah. But like, you know, I was in Berlin for 14 years and I literally saw a bullet show up out of the blue sky.
Like, oh my gosh, look, what is this cocktail that I can make now?
Well, that was just sort of it, because before that it was Maker's Mark, Old Overholt, and obviously Jack and Jim.
There were a few good men.
Yeah. And then Sazerac, after Diageo took over and Bullet expanded massively, Sazerac took it seriously, and suddenly you get Eagle Rare and Blanton's, and then Michter showed up, and then, you know, it sort of like became a viable thing, right? Where, you know, I remember in 2003 going into a bar in Berlin or London or Prague or wherever, and it was Jack and Jim Beam and maybe some random bottle that you didn't recognize because you hadn't seen the U.S., which at the time, had I known, it was probably like a Heaven Hill 20-year-old or something crazy that they were trying to get rid of.
County or
right? Or whatever Martin Hill was for Germany or for France or whatever they were trying to sell to get rid of. Yeah. It would be some random thing where you're like, what is this garbage? Like an off-brand bourbon. Just completely unaware of what was going on at the time. So that would be it. Like I remember traveling, going to China in 2005 and Jack Daniels was everywhere then. Like if you'd walk down the street, every bar had a Jack Daniels sign in it. And so, those sort of places have been going for a while because, Brown-Forman had the vision in the early 2000s to be like, hey, let's go prime this pump. And now, that pump's pretty primed, but also just the capacity, right? Like, Whiskey House is obviously about to open, we talked about Trey earlier. I mean, they're opening a massive facility as well. All this stuff has to go somewhere.
It's got to take
and we all have been in some sort of different business our lives and we're adults and that things go up and down, man. And it's always fucking peaks and valleys, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
I do not think the sky is falling. I hate the sky is falling crowd, whether it be in restaurants or spirits, because it's not going to fall like it did in the 60s and 70s. No. It's just not, because it's a completely different world economically, but also structurally, advertorially, everything. So now it's just like, hey, let's get ahead of the curve internationally. Yeah. See how that plays out for the next decade.
Yeah. You gotta be an early adopter. And, I heard it best described, I forget which brand it was, but they were like, there's this idea of China, and like once you feed the red dragon is what it's called, like it never stops eating.
Right.
Like if you get in there and it makes a dent, you will be set.
Yeah.
And you have to be ready for capacity.
Well,
right?
and that's just it. Like there's a point where I like step back and like I'm looking at these. You look at these markets and like, okay, the U.S. has 340 million people, right? EU has 425 million people. India and China have almost 3.5 billion people. So, when you're talking about single percentages, that means a huge difference in these places. And so if you're talking about like, because we're looking at China and India in the future, and if you're looking at those sort of markets, I mean, it's third to half the world's population in just two markets.
Yeah.
It's kind of unfathomable coming from even if you're just looking at the EU US.
Yeah, it's wild, right? It's crazy how many people live in those two countries, and it's also crazy how you all have made this rye whiskey taste so good. And that
is a hard transition.
Is a transition if you ever heard one. Don't you worry, people.
So I think you guys know I'm a rye guy, right? Like,
yes.
Yeah, we've been on enough trips and enough tastings together.
Yeah. So this, I'm the rye person out of the two of us. This does remind me of Michter's Toasted Rye. It is kind of that same playing field to me, even though it's a 95.5. Michter's doesn't disclose their mash bill. So you left guessing at that point what it is. But this doesn't give you like the grassy notes or anything like that. This is really caramel, vanilla, citrus. But that wood, that toasted really kind of elevates all of those to give you just a really, I'm not going to say it's complex because I think it's really straightforward. It's a straightforward whiskey. Right. And that's what you kind of want if you're going to pay that. You don't want some like mysterious tasting whiskey. This is a truly straightforward, flavorful whiskey that, I don't know, I guess it's barrel proof, so I'm going to say it's in the 110s.
I think it's 57, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, but I don't think it drinks warm at all.
Yeah, again, it's
blended really well.
Yeah. I can't see from over here, but I think it's 59. But yeah, it's this sort of that toasted barrel really just rounds it out.
There's like marshmallow fluff on this that are just really nice.
And going back to the conversation we had earlier, one of the best whiskeys I've ever had is Michter's Toasted Barrel Rye. Michter's Toasted Barrel Rye from like 2018, like many, many years ago. But it was like discovering what toasted does.
Yeah.
and like so many people are doing it very, very well. And this is what toasted barrels do.
Yes. So yeah, you get that sort of like on the nose, it's that marshmallow fluff. It's like that really rich sweetness that turns into a nice warm rye on the end where you get, but it's almost like way back on the end. You almost get like a little bit of a chocolate tobacco note. Like there's a bit of a journey there that you go through, and it's not a dill forward or pickle rye.
No,
like it maybe if you wanted to get deep in the weeds on it, you could find some roasting herbs in there, but I don't know. That would be stretching if you know.
This isn't your spice rack rye.
No, it's really not.
Because I think the toasted barrel takes out the spice rack and then gives you more of those tannic vanillin, characteristics, which I think is really nice if you're looking for a flavorful rye whiskey. This is a sipping rye whiskey. This isn't a rye whiskey. You're like, oh, hey, I'm going to go make an old fashioned with it.
Let's not do that.
Well, you say that. No,
you say that, but it makes a hell of an old fashioned. And your old fashioned was $45, sir.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, like this is a rye whiskey that could confuse a bourbon drinker, I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah, easily. Because especially that nose.
Yeah.
Like it's like the nose for me, like it almost, maybe even a little bit of, maybe a little peach in there too.
I was thinking
you
like
get a lot of fruit, a lot of fruit in it.
Yeah.
It might just because I keep getting my boys the Ale 8 peach.
No, but like,
it's just, you know what I mean?
Seasonal drink.
Yeah, it just came to Kroger, so I've been drinking a lot of that with Emily last week.
No, I mean, it does have like those like succulent stone fruits, right? Like, and I just made peaches for my infant the other day, so I like put them in a blender. So who needs Gerber when you have a food processor?
Right.
Just throw it in there and hit a button. And then if they scream, it's just loud for a minute. But no, I mean, this is perfect for summertime.
Yeah. I also say there's a little touch of spearmint in there. If there's anything green, it's more that than
minty.
Yeah. There's no real grassiness or any of that. And look, I love rye, so there is a place and time where I want a big like pickly dill bomb, or something like that. Like if I'm rolling with the like Jewish deli pastrami sandwich, like give me that dill bomb, But and there's so much going on in rye in Europe right now, and Germany, France doing amazing ryes. This to me, this is like Kentucky rye, even though it's not. It's finished in Kentucky. And again, in that Kelvin barrel, it comes from Indiana, but it was, aged and finished here.
Yeah.
It feels just so...
Yeah, I completely agree.
So unique.
Confusing.
Yeah.
Like, you could put this in front of a bourbon drinker and be like, try this new bourbon. They're like, what is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where did that come from?
Like, it's like...
What's that mash bill?
Yeah, you would think it's like a 36% rye.
Yeah.
Bourbon. Like,
yeah. You could get that, or you could get a Kentucky style rye, like a 56,
Yeah.
Like it does feel like it's got corn sweetness in it a little bit because of the way it layers in. But
I think that's that fresh barrel.
Yeah.
That toasted barrel.
I agree. And I ultimately think that this also would go into that halo effect of, your Michter's toasted barrel, which are 119. I think this is a little bit more pricey than that, but you're 119 to 150 somewhere in there. This kind of fits that bill, what you would expect out of that whiskey. I always ask myself this: if I had $200, would I go buy it? Knowing what I know now, I'd pick the rye up over the bourbon. That's just my personal opinion. I think the rye
guys for life, baby.
I think that's what would just show up in my palate. I'm not saying the bourbon's bad, but I think the rye just has more characters to my palate. So this could be one of those things like, hey, if you had $200 and you wanted to celebrate, what would you buy? This could be something that would go.
Yeah. And that's, coming again from Uprocks and SEO and media on that end, that's what people do, man. Like people look up, hey, I'm going to get a gift for my boss. What's a $70 bottle? What's a $120 bottle? I'm going to get a gift for my grandfather, blah, blah, blah. What's a $200 bottle?
In that range, whatever my range is.
They look up ranges, right? And so, and I know for a fact, people look up $500 bottles. People look up $1,000 bottles. It's less people, but it's still people. And I also know for a fact, because at Uprocks, we would do affiliate links, and we had, we'd get tracking information from retailers. People would buy it, so it's not like this stuff just sits on the shelf, and I understand people who get peeved that prices are going up, but prices are going up for fucking everything, man. Like, I go to Taco Bell and it costs twice as much as it did 20 years ago. Shocking, right? No, it's fucking called life.
Yeah. Inflation's a mother effer.
Yeah. And
I'm not finding as many $5 bills in my pockets anymore.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And, and
What does change?
And I don't mean that coldly, but it's also kind of reality, man. Like, I'm old enough to remember when McDonald's had deals for quarter hamburgers.
Oh, dude.
You know what I mean? Like,
we'd get 5 Big Macs for $4.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a deal.
Yeah.
Now, did this porky little kid need a Big Mac? No, but I sure shit ate the hell out of it.
Right. But, it's the sort of thing where, like, if you want bourbon that's, $9.99, it's down there on the shelf, and it's mixed with neutral spirit, probably. Hey, don't hit on Old Fitz Prime bottle or Old Fitz Prime. It's down there.
That's some summer drinking
it's
bourbon.
$9.99. But $9.99.
That being said, like, you can go up to $12, $14, $15.99 and get perfectly good bourbon.
Oh, for sure.
JTS Brown, Evan Williams Bottle and Bond. It's still there. Yeah. Nobody's taking that away.
Nope.
And no one's ever going to take that away. I mean, it's going to go up in price over the years. 20 years from now, it's probably going to be $19.99 and $21.99, right?
Yeah.
But,
that's the way life is.
Yeah. And that's just, when we came into this, like, this has been a luxury LTO product that is now expanding into other realms, right?
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, you got your footing. And,
yeah. Like, we have our fans.
Yeah. And that, was it Gary Vaynerchuk, who said, find your 100 true fans, and then they're going to turn your brand into like the next level.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's
like
just
when you're releasing 600 bottles of rye whiskey for a batch, you're going to find those true fans. And then that's what you build your footing on.
Exactly. And, it's the sort of thing where, it's, if you're searching for a $200 bottle of any whiskey, it's going to be for a special occasion. Yeah. No one's, pretending that it's not. I mean, yes, if we were in the 1%, no, then it probably wouldn't be for a special occasion. It'd be your everyday pour, but that's a whole different conversation. Yeah. And like with, where we started out, when I was talking about my favorite whiskeys from my list, like, yeah, I like to drink elite whiskeys because I have access to them. I'm lucky that I have access to that stuff, whether I buy it myself or whether, it has been gifted to me or whether I got it through work or what have you. I'm extremely, extremely lucky to have had it, and to be able to enjoy it. And so my everyday pours aren't going to be Jake's everyday pours or Scott's or Tim's or Betty's or whomever's,
I don't know. I think we could go pour for a little bit.
Yeah, we'd be pretty close. I think
just for like a day. Yeah. And then it would be like,
well, I just gave away a whole bunch of samples because I have all this whiskey I don't know what to do with. And obviously it's all open. So, and through obvious ethics, there's no way to sell it because it was through work. So I've just been giving whiskey away, left and right. And I gave some samples to a friend in whiskey media, and he keeps texting me these bottles that just have like my scribbles on them. And he's like, what's this? And I'm like, oh, that's a Glenfiddich 39. He's like, what?
That's your code.
Yeah. And he's like, what's this? I was like, I think that's a 1958 Japanese whiskey. He's like, huh? It's like, I don't know, man. It's here. Because it's like, I gave him probably 6 boxes of samples and 2 full boxes of whiskey, and it didn't even put a dent in what I have. Oh. I need to bring you guys like several boxes, like, because
it's stupid.
Now that I know where you live,
I know what you did last summer.
And run.
Yeah, literally, with a note from my wife to his wife being like, "So sorry."
Yeah. Well,
we struggle with this too.
Yeah,
on a smaller scale. And
yeah, I mean, it's still like, so like I have a couple bottles like sitting on the table, and I'm like, I gotta catalog them. I'm like, because like I like to know what I have.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, like I like to catalog everything. Because if somebody comes over, I want to know where it is, what I have. So there's 12 bottles sitting over there, and I'm like, what am I going to do with these 12 bottles? How do I get through them? I don't. And then Scott and I, we were doing the same thing with my samples over there. He's like, this sample is from 3 years ago. I'm like, yeah, man, like this sample came in, there was no podcast booked, and then you gave me 7 others. So I like my liver to function. I drink responsibly.
We like when the guest brings the whiskey and then takes it back.
Yes, exactly. I'm a big fan of that. Big fan of what Zach's doing tonight. So yeah, I mean, it's really cool how these parallel, but they are different, right? Like it's a whole new flex for you. So I'm super excited for you. I'm super excited for the brand. And I think it's going to be really cool to see what this evolution is. And again, pay attention to Blackwood Distilling social media. So before we close this up, tell people where they can find out more about the brand and where they can go to maybe purchase a bottle if there are some left.
So, yes, there's going to be some out in the market. You're going to be able to buy it in Florida and Texas in this month and into next month. Colorado and Georgia, closer to the summer and fall. You can buy it in Kentucky. If you go to blackwooddistilling.com or just Google Blackwood Distilling, there will be a product locator page on there. It'll tell you everywhere in Kentucky to buy it. Obviously, House of Bourbon in Louisville and Lexington, Bourbon Outfitter is another place you can go. You can go to Blackwood Distilling, Blackwood Distilling Co. on Instagram. Follow along with what we're up to. And you can follow me at ZTP Whiskey, as I'll be traveling a lot soon, and you'll see where we're going to be going with our new releases and, how we're going to be expanding and all those things as well. But follow Blackwood Distilling Co. first.
Yeah.
For the behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes, follow Zach. Yeah,
exactly.
No, we appreciate you coming over, man. I know it's that long trek from Oldham County to the good old city of Louisville can be daunting. But we're glad you made it back here, and we're glad we got to sit down and see what you're up to, but also get to try this great whiskey. So I know there's more to come, and we look forward to keeping in touch as Blackwood Distilling continues to grow. So we appreciate it, and everyone, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks, Zach.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. Make sure you're connected with Scott and I via social media on Instagram, X, and Facebook. We'd love to connect. And if you're more the professional type, follow us over on LinkedIn. If you want to know more about Bourbon Lens, make sure you're subscribed to our weekly newsletter, The Weekly Pour. For exclusive content and more, check out Patreon. Follow us there at Bourbon Lens. And last but not least, on your favorite podcast listening app, make sure you're subscribed, because every Monday, Scott and I release a podcast, and we would love to have you here listening to the newest features and the newest whiskey news. And until next time, cheers.